Welcome to our podcast session. Today we're diving into the deep, complex world of Calvinism in America. You know how it shapes worship and community, especially in West Michigan.
Absolutely. It's a fascinating look into a theology that's been running through centuries and still stirring up debates today.
Right, so, let's start with the worship aspect. In Calvinist traditions, especially in Reformed churches, you encounter a sort of stripped-down worship style. No incense, no icons, no elaborate decorations. It's all about scripture, sermons, and a kind of austere architecture.
That austere style really reflects Calvin's insistence that worship must focus solely on God's glory rather than on eliciting human emotion, doesn't it?
Exactly, and, it's like when you walk into one of these churches, you immediately feel that weight. The idea that God isn't necessarily your friend, He's your king.
Right,
There's
yeah.
a solemn air, a sense that worship is not for entertainment but a solemn covenant.
Interesting, because it seems like such a bold contrast to many modern worship services, which often lean heavily on emotional connection.
Yes, exactly. Calvin was, very clear. Everything had to be centered on God's glory, so music had to teach doctrinal truths, and art had to point strictly to Scripture. Any deviation might risk what he called idolatry.
But don't you think that emphasis on doctrine sometimes overlooks the human need for, relatable emotional experiences?
That's a good point. There is this tension. Calvinism creates an environment where emotion is almost second-guessed, because any overt display might detract from divine majesty. It's a double-edged sword, isn't it?
Definitely. And moving on, the input really paints a picture of West Michigan, where Calvinism isn't only a set of theological points, but a way of life. Church, families, even businesses tend to revolve around these principles.
Absolutely. In West Michigan, Calvinism is woven into the social and moral fabric here. Weekly church attendance by whole families, schools, and businesses shaped by Reformed ethics. It's like the church is the epicenter of life. And that's the fascinating, sometimes intense part of it.
Yeah, with that intense unity comes this kind of pressure, right? To conform and pretty much to constantly be seen as elect.
Right on. And that pressure is a significant recurring theme, because the idea of election carries with it, well, both assurance and anxiety. On one hand, if you're among the elect, you have eternal security. On the other, you're constantly questioning, am I really among them?
It's a paradoxical kind of comfort and stress. It must be exhausting for some to live under that persistent pressure.
Precisely. Some very disciplined individuals are always scanning their lives for signs of grace, while others fall into despair or even become rebellious, rejecting the whole premise.
Yeah, that's really intense.
It's like walking on a tightrope between assurance and anxiety.
And this tension, it's evident not just in individual lives, but in community interactions too, isn't it?
Exactly. In these communities, conformity isn't just recommended, it's almost required. Every action, every display of emotion becomes a public indicator of someone's stance in the elect versus the non-elect debate. Everything from dress codes in schools to debates on modern issues reflects this.
Speaking of modern issues, the input also touches on how Calvinism today wrestles with questions Calvin never imagined, right?
Definitely. Churches in West Michigan and beyond are now contending with issues like women's leadership in the church, LGBTQ inclusion, even climate change as a moral matter. Calvin's theology, deeply rooted in the idea that hard work is a sign of election and that personal morality shapes destiny, meets a modern world full of new challenges.
And that really highlights an interesting twist. While Calvin's ideas may seem ancient, they remain incredibly influential, even in places like American capitalism, where success and poverty are interpreted through a theological lens.
Right. Max Weber famously argued that American capitalism was, in many ways, shaped by these very ideas. that prosperity is seen as divine favor and poverty, maybe even as disapproval. It's fascinating how a 500-year-old theological machine still gears modern culture.
Indeed, really fascinating. But here's something that puzzles me a bit. If Calvinism lays so much emphasis on doctrine and clear-cut societal norms, how do these communities deal with inevitable internal diversity in beliefs?
That's a really good question. On
Indeed.
one hand, the unity is maintained by a strict adherence to tradition, but on the other, some are breaking open the system, challenging these norms, especially as society evolves. There are debates over what it means to live by grace and whether grace should still be exclusive.
So, it's an ongoing evolution within the tradition, kind of a push and pull between holding on to historical doctrines and adapting to modern sensibilities?
Exactly, and it's interesting to note that the very principles that once rigidly structured every aspect of society are being reinterpreted. In some cases, people are using that same heritage as a foundation to argue for personal and even political freedom.
Right, yeah. But wouldn't you say there's a risk? I mean, could this internal debate, this struggle to balance tradition and change, lead to a fragmentation of the community?
That's a valid concern.
Mm-hmm.
There's always the danger that too much internal dissent can weaken the communal bonds that have, for centuries, provided a sense of direction and assurance. Yet at the same time, some argue that this re-examination is exactly what keeps the tradition alive and relevant.
I see. So it's a bittersweet process, where challenging the old ways might both undermine and revitalize the community simultaneously.
Precisely. And that's why we see so much variety in modern Calvinist circles, some clinging to tradition, others pushing for change, and many negotiating a middle path. It's a dynamic, almost
Absolutely.
living history at play.
Let's talk a bit more about the modern cultural impact. How do you think Calvin's ideas influenced broader American values like the Protestant work ethic and even small government?
Oh, that's an excellent point. Calvin's notion that hard work could be a sign of divine favor feeds directly into the idea of the Protestant work ethic.
Yeah,
It's like,
yep.
every successful venture is interpreted as a confirmation of your moral standing. And that spills over into political realms, where principles of personal morality and limited government are seen as extensions of those religious ideals.
So in that way, the influence is both subtle and enormous. It permeates daily life, even if people aren't always consciously aware of its origins.
Exactly, and it's ironic too, because while Calvin's Geneva was a strict theocracy, it indirectly laid the groundwork for the value of individual responsibility, which later influenced ideas like the separation of church and state.
That irony's pretty striking. Strict religious control leading to values of individual freedom, at least in a certain sense.
True, and there's an interesting interplay there. While churches today maintain traditions and a collective identity, rekindling discussions about grace and exclusion, they also find themselves adapting to a pluralistic society where questions of personal freedom are paramount.
Right, yeah. Now, what do you think is the most enduring aspect of Calvinism in modern life? Is it the way worship is conducted, or the communal pressure to conform?
I'd say it's not just one thing, but the overall framework, the idea that faith is deeply intertwined with everyday life. Whether it's the austerity of worship, the
Exactly.
community's moral expectations, or even the modern debates on inclusion and leadership, all of it feeds back into a persistent, albeit evolving, Calvinist culture.
And despite all the challenges, that framework seems to continue shaping lives in surprising ways, even if it sometimes leads to tension and anxiety.
Right. And that tension, while uncomfortable, also keeps the conversation alive, driving people to critically evaluate what it means to be, truly elect, and how those ancient doctrines can manifest in modern contexts.
Absolutely. It's a living dialogue between the past and the present, constantly asking, how do we stay true to centuries-old convictions while addressing the changing world?
Exactly. And that's what makes Calvinism such a compelling subject. It's as much about contemporary identity and community as it is about age-old theology.
Well, this discussion certainly shows that these debates are far from settled and will keep fueling passionate discussions in communities for years to come.
Absolutely. And it's been great unpacking these layers with you. It really turns out that even theology can be understood as a dynamic interplay of history, culture, and personal identity.
Right, definitely. Thanks for this enlightening journey through Calvinism's past and present. It's a conversation that, well, really makes you think twice about the relationship between doctrine and daily life.
And with that, we wrap up for today. Until next time, keep questioning and exploring the intricate tapestry of ideas that shape our world.